Ever catch yourself wondering what it'd really be like, to be one of those professors? Like
Yeah.
beyond the whole tweed jacket image.
Right, right.
We're about to take a deep dive into a career that might just be your secret route into that whole academic world, assistant lecturer.
Oh, interesting.
You've got a stack of stuff there from RoleCatcher's career guides.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I do. They've got this whole roadmap about becoming an assistant lecturer.
Okay, so assistant lecturer, um, I gotta ask, is that like the academic world's version of an internship or something?
It's definitely a lot more than fetching coffee, that's for sure.
Okay, good.
What really stands out about this role, and RoleCatcher really drives this point home, is that it's a full-time gig, a really autonomous position. They're not just like assisting, they're leading lectures, doing serious research,
Ah,
publishing in those big-time academic journals. It's pretty impressive.
okay, so that actually does sound pretty impressive. But the whole assistant part of the title, I don't know, it still kind of throws me off. So is it a stepping stone? Or can you actually build like a full career as an assistant lecturer?
It's funny you say that because it's often both. And the guide actually addresses that very misconception. You're right, in a lot of cases, it is a stepping stone, a way to climb that academic ladder, right?
Right.
You might start out as an assistant lecturer, then move up to lecturer, senior lecturer, maybe even snag that coveted professor title eventually.
Nice.
But at the same time, it's a position that carries real weight. You can carve out your own niche, have a genuine impact, even at that level.
So you're telling me this could be a ticket to a full-fledged career in academia. Now I'm even more curious about what an assistant lecturer actually does day to day. It can't all be research papers and faculty meetings, right?
Well, let's just say it's definitely not for those who want an easy ride. Imagine this. You're prepping lectures, grading assignments, and yes, there are a lot of papers. But you're also diving deep into your own research projects, maybe even presenting your findings at a conference, surrounded by the top experts in your field. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
It also sounds like you need, a serious academic background even to get your foot in the door. I know RealCatcher mentioned needing at least a master's, maybe even a doctorate. But what about actual teaching experience? I mean, you can't learn how to handle a lecture hall full of students from a textbook, right?
You're hitting on something super important there. The guide really stresses how vital hands-on experiences. Think back to grad school, right? Those teaching assistantships, the student teaching, even if you just volunteered to lead a workshop, those experiences are what really get you ready for the realities of the classroom.
Yeah.
It's one thing to know your stuff backwards and forwards, but it's another thing entirely to actually bring that knowledge to life for your students.
That's a good point. It seems like this role takes a special kind of person, someone who's not just passionate about their field, but loves to share that knowledge and can handle, that fast-paced academic environment. So let's talk about the elephant in the room,
Sure.
pros and cons. What does the role catcher guide say about, the best and, let's be honest, maybe the not so great parts of this career?
One of the biggest draws to this job, at least according to the guide, is that incredible sense of fulfillment you get from directly shaping students' educations. That ability to light a fire in someone, to help them fall in love with learning. That's a huge motivator for a lot of people who choose this path. But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Academia, let's be real, isn't exactly known for having like the biggest paychecks.
Right, right.
The guide does point out that assistant lecturer salaries tend to be lower compared to other jobs that require similar levels of education and expertise.
So you might be saying goodbye to a big paycheck, but you're getting the chance to make a real difference in the world. That's not a bad trade-off, if you ask me, but definitely something to think about. I know we've only just scratched the surface here. What else really stood out to you from RoleCatcher's Guide?
One thing that really struck me was how the guide breaks down the different stages of this whole career path, from starting out as an assistant lecturer all the way up to principal lecturer.
Oh, wow.
And they even give you a sneak peek at what your average day might look like at each level, which I think is super helpful for someone who's just starting to explore this whole thing.
Yeah, it's like getting a backstage pass, right? You get to see where this path could actually lead you, all the different directions it could take you.
Exactly.
I thought it was really interesting how they included those example profiles for each stage.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to have, like, a list of responsibilities, but it's a whole other thing to see how a real person might actually embody those, at each level.
Absolutely. It makes it way more relatable, right?
Right.
Like, for instance, at the assistant lecturer level, they had this great example of someone who's juggling, prepping lectures, delivering those lectures,
Wow.
doing their own research, presenting at conferences. It really just shows you how dynamic the role is, even right from the start.
Yeah. And it seems like as you progress, the responsibilities, they kind of evolve, the stakes get a little higher. Like I noticed in the example profile for a lecture, they mentioned things like supervising assistant lecturers,
Right.
conducting more independent research, even publishing books and articles. It seems like as leadership and mentorship become a much bigger part of the job as you move up that ladder.
Absolutely. And that upward trajectory just continues. When you get to that senior lecturer level, the example profile kind of shifts to this more strategic perspective. You're talking about like managing whole academic programs, shaping teaching strategies, even collaborating with people in the industry on these cutting edge research projects. It really gives you a sense of the long-term impact you can have.
So you become kind of like an architect of knowledge,
Yeah, I like that.
building bridges between academia and the real world.
Yeah.
Okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's rewind a bit. You mentioned those example profiles even include like a glimpse into a typical day at each level.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like for an assistant lecturer? We're talking like back-to-back lectures,
Yeah.
endless grading, scrambling to do research at 2:00 a.m.?
Yeah, I'll say the guide definitely doesn't try to downplay the workload.
Right.
A typical day might involve, giving multiple lectures or seminars, often back to back, which definitely takes stamina and, being able to think on your feet.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's all the work that goes on behind the scenes, right? You're reviewing materials, creating engaging presentations, maybe even weaving in your own research to keep things fresh and relevant.
That's a lot to juggle.
Mm.
And we haven't even talked about those legendary stacks of grading. I can only imagine those are a constant companion for an assistant lecturer.
Oh, for sure. RoleCatcher definitely doesn't sugarcoat that. Grading is a huge part of the job, and they emphasize how important it is to approach it not just as a chore, but as a real opportunity to give students valuable feedback, something that helps them learn and grow.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
You want to maintain high standards, but you also want to be supportive and encouraging as a mentor. And on top of lectures and grading, assistant lecturers are expected to be available for student consultations too,
Right.
offering guidance and support outside of class. With all that, I mean, is there any time to breathe?
Mm-hmm.
What does the guide say about, like, work-life balance in this whole equation?
Well, that is the million-dollar question in academia, isn't it?
Right.
And while the guide doesn't get super specific about work-life balance, it does highlight that there's often a good bit of flexibility that comes with the territory.
Okay, a glimmer of hope for those late-night grading sessions. But seriously, how does that flexibility actually work in practice?
Well, for one thing, academics usually have some control over their schedules.
Okay.
They'll have blocks of time for teaching and research, but they can often structure those blocks in a way that works for them.
So it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 kind of gig.
Not always. And then, those networking opportunities we talked about, like the conferences, the workshops, the collaborations, those aren't just about getting ahead in your career.
Oh, well.
They're a chance to connect with colleagues, maybe get some tips on work-life balance from people who figured it out. And just remember that you're not alone in all of this.
Finding your people.
Yeah.
Finding your people within a very specific field. So it seems like RoleCatcher does a good job of painting this, realistic and multifaceted picture of what it really takes to not just survive, but actually thrive as an assistant lecturer.
Totally.
But they don't really touch on one thing I was thinking about. Can you be like an assistant lecturer of something?
Huh.
Like, do you specialize right out of the gate?
You've actually hit on something the guide doesn't really address.
Interesting.
RoleCatcher does a great job with those core skills and experiences, but they don't get into a ton of detail about specializing in a particular subject.
Right.
And you're right, what you specialize in really does shape your day-to-day experience. An assistant lecturer in, say, history is going to have a totally different experience than someone in, like, computer science, right?
Totally. Different subject matter, teaching styles, even the research methods are going to be different.
Exactly.
I'm curious, though, when RoleCatcher talks about that typical day, are they trying to make it relatable to everyone? Or did they base it on one specific field for their example?
They kept it pretty broad, which makes sense. They're going for a general overview of the role. It's more about those common threads, the tasks and challenges that most assistant lecturers are going to face, no matter what they teach.
Okay, so what are those universal truths? What can someone expect day to day, whether they're teaching philosophy or physics?
Well, be ready for a fast-paced environment. You might be giving back-to-back lectures or seminars, which means not only knowing your stuff, but also knowing how to engage a room full of students, sometimes at 8 in the morning.
Yeah, no small feat.
And those lectures don't write themselves. You're spending a good chunk of time reviewing material, updating those presentations, maybe even working your own research in to keep things fresh.
Sounds like a lot to manage. And we can't forget about those infamous stacks of grading. Does RoleCatcher have any tips on how assistant lecturers handle that never-ending task?
They don't shy away from it, that's for sure. The guide's very clear that grading is a big part of the job. They emphasize that it's not just a chore, it's a chance to give students valuable feedback, help them learn and grow.
Finding that balance.
Exactly.
Keeping those standards high, but also being that supportive mentor. And then, on top of lectures and grading, assistant lecturers are expected to be available for those student consultations too,
Right.
offering guidance and support outside of class. I have to ask, is there any time for, life outside of work? What about work-life balance in all of this?
That's the million-dollar question in academia, right?
Right.
And the guide does acknowledge that, but it also points out that there's often a good deal of flexibility that comes with being an assistant lecturer.
Okay.
You might have more control over your schedule compared to, say, a traditional 9 to 5.
So there's hope for a life beyond the lecture hall.
There definitely is. And remember those networking opportunities we talked about? Conferences, workshops, collaborations.
Yeah.
Those aren't just about getting ahead. They're about connecting with colleagues, swapping strategies for work-life balance, remembering that you're not alone in this.
Finding your people.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the assistant lecturing, I think the big question is it a stepping stone? Or can it be a fulfilling career in itself? What do you think?
I think the beauty is it can be both. It's a launching pad if you want to climb that academic ladder, but it's also a chance to build a really unique and impactful career, shape young minds, contribute to your field, and just be a part of that exciting, always evolving world of academia. And that's something worth exploring, don't you think?
Definitely. And for anyone listening, maybe that exploration starts right now. Dig into that information, ask yourself the tough questions, and see if this path, with all of its challenges and rewards, is the one for you.